When you said it, and we've talked before, but I know there have been institutions we've worked with, whether it's a college or actual churches, who have been victimized by attacks and have had to pay what could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I think this is an important topic to address with our churches, because really no one's safe when it comes to this. And Tom, you hit it earlier. A lot of times churches will have specific things that they're saving up money for. And the stories are tragic. We've talked about this earlier, but I know there was a church that had a cyber attack, and they were saving for a new building, and it was over $1 million, that was taken, and that was through a social engineering scheme. And just to think that churches will save money to do what they're supposed to help reach the community, and pools of money dedicated to serving people are taken. It's horrible. Are there any other claims or anything that you want to address as it relates to this world of cybersecurity?
So there's really two things that we see happen a lot. Number one is the ransomware with churches.
Okay.
The other thing that I would say is the notification that you may have to do if you lose information. So a lot of churches now do online giving. If somebody breaks into the system and you can't tell that the information was used or not, but they have compromised those people's information, you have to notify those people, and actually you may have to give them a year's worth of credit reporting to make sure that nothing is happening. And that's when it gets expensive, because it's normally $3 a person for every name that you lose, and it's $10 per person if they decide that they want the credit reporting for a year, credit protection for a year.
Is that pretty common in other organizations, even outside of the church world, with different companies where they have to do that kind of
notification? Absolutely. The loss of personal identifiable information, the PII in the environment, Social Security numbers, address, the things that make it specific to that individual. When that data is lost, then you're required to not only notify them, but then protect them against a credit attack as well. So once that information is out there, it actually goes on the black market, and so your Social Security number is sold for $1 to $3 per instance. So there's a whole industry, that $1 billion market that we were talking about. There's a black market for Social Security numbers. So the goal, obviously, is to steal that information so that it can be hawked online, and that's why you need the credit monitoring.
That's an interesting point. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I think there's really two areas that could be under attack. One is for churches. One is getting into the finances, right? So being able to actually steal funds from a church. There's also the ransomware. We're going to lock down your system unless you pay us. But then also the stealing of that PII, that what was it? Personal identifiable information. Okay. Yeah. So I guess I think of, most churches have a pool of donors, tithers, people who have given offerings. They probably have, a lot of churches have software tools or different tools to keep all of that information. So I imagine they have data that someone might want to have, whether it's giving information or someone's PII. Yeah. And the church really needs to steward that data and make sure that that is kept safe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jerry nailed it. Whether or not the information was actually stolen or not and used or not is somewhat irrelevant. If we identify that the bad guys got in and there's a possibility that they have stolen that information, then the requirement is triggered to put these protections in place.
Sure.
And so even if you don't think that it was actually compromised, it still doesn't absolve the organization from having to spend all the money, i.e. the insurance policy that kicks in that you need, that backs you up. Without those insurance policies, you're writing the checks yourself and coming up with cash, and it can easily add up to be hundreds of thousands of dollars for an organization.
And one of the things that we've noticed too is a lot of organizations, churches especially, say, I don't need to worry about that. I have a third party that actually collects all that information. So we don't actually get credit card numbers and all that sort of stuff. But what they don't realize is if you read the contract with that third party, if anything happens, and I had this happen at a church, the third parties basically allowed something to happen. In the contract itself, it basically says to the church that you're responsible for anything that happens.
Not the third party?
Not the third party.
Okay.
And most of the contracts that, one of the things we do from a risk management standpoint is look at those contracts. I actually happen to point that out because after we had a claim with that church, and we paid out close to $300,000 to protect them, can we subrogate? They go, hey, it was really the third party that was the problem. And we actually looked at the contract, and the contract had a hold harmless against the third party. So you got to be very, very careful. Most people say, hey, we use a third party vendor, so we're not responsible. And actually, yeah, you're the one that is responsible because it's the information that you collected,
right,
even though you may be using a third party vendor.